They said I had mommy brain and couldn't keep up with the fast-paced demands of pharmaceutical innovation. What they didn't know was that the revolutionary drug delivery system that would transform their entire industry was sitting in my home lab, waiting for the right moment to change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It was supposed to be an ordinary Wednesday morning at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the kind where you survive on lukewarm coffee and pretend that the endless pipeline meetings actually lead to breakthrough discoveries. The kind where you nod along as executives discuss market penetration while secretly wondering if they've ever spent a sleepless night in a research lab. I'd been through enough corporate theater to recognize the signs. We gathered in the mahogany-paneled boardroom on the 15th floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a pristine view of downtown Portland's skyline. Jessica Whitmore stood at the head of the polished conference table, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her equally severe expression. The newly appointed Vice President of Strategic Operations had been brought in 6 months ago with a mandate to, quote, modernize our human capital approach and eliminate what she called, quote, inefficiencies. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The morning light streaming through those windows cast sharp shadows across her angular face as she began her rehearsed speech. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice, she said, her voice carrying the kind of artificial warmth that immediately put everyone on edge. After extensive analysis of our departmental productivity metrics and forward-looking strategic alignment, we've reached some difficult but necessary conclusions about our workforce optimization. I watched her hands as she spoke, perfectly manicured, never trembling, moving with the calculated precision of someone who had delivered this exact speech before. The leather portfolio in front of her remained unopened, but I knew it contained our professional death sentences. Effective immediately, Jessica continued, her tone shifting to something colder, more clinical, we're implementing a comprehensive restructuring initiative. Unfortunately, this means that several positions have become redundant. Specifically, any team member who has demonstrated decreased cognitive performance, divided attention spans, or inability to maintain our rigorous innovation standards will be transitioned out of their current roles. The silence that followed wasn't the stunned quiet of surprise. It was the suffocating stillness of inevitability. We all knew what decreased cognitive performance meant in corporate speak. It meant the mothers. It meant the women who had dared to have children and return to work, only to face subtle but persistent discrimination disguised as performance concerns. Sarah Chen, who had returned from maternity leave just 8 weeks ago, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Maria Santos, a brilliant biochemist whose twin toddlers had been battling ear infections, stared down at her hands. Rebecca Foster, whose groundbreaking work on targeted drug delivery had earned the company 3 patents in the past 2 years, looked as though she'd been slapped. I didn't flinch. I'd learned long ago that showing emotion in these situations only gave them ammunition. Instead, I studied Jessica's face, memorizing every micro-expression, every calculated pause. She was enjoying this moment, savoring the power she held over our careers and livelihoods. Now I know this comes as a shock, Jessica continued, though her tone suggested she found our potential distress more inconvenient than concerning. But we need team members who can dedicate 100% of their focus to advancing Meridian's mission. We can't afford the liability of employees whose attention is compromised by external responsibilities. External responsibilities. As if raising the next generation of human beings was some frivolous hobby we'd picked up on weekends. Dr. Catherine Reeves, she said, and my stomach dropped as she turned her attention directly to me. While your historical contributions to our oncology research division have been noted, recent performance evaluations indicate a concerning decline in your analytical capabilities. Your project completion rates have decreased, and your colleagues have reported instances of what can only be described as scattered thinking patterns. I felt the eyes of my coworkers on me, some sympathetic, others carefully averted to avoid being associated with whatever was happening. Jessica pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table with theatrical precision. Furthermore, she continued, your recent request for flexible scheduling to accommodate childcare responsibilities demonstrates a fundamental misalignment with our culture of excellence. We simply cannot maintain our competitive edge when key personnel are operating with what industry experts commonly refer to as maternal cognitive burden. Maternal cognitive burden. I almost laughed at the clinical terminology she'd used to describe the supposed brain fog that comes with motherhood, as if the ability to simultaneously manage complex research protocols, coordinate with international collaborators, track medication interactions, and ensure a 4-year-old eats something other than goldfish crackers somehow made me less capable, not more. Your resignation letter is expected by 5 o'clock today, Jessica concluded, sliding the manila folder across the table toward me. Human Resources has prepared a comprehensive transition package, and we're confident this decision will benefit both parties in the long term. I didn't reach for the folder. Instead, I stood slowly, gathering my thoughts and my dignity in equal measure. Around the table, I saw faces I'd worked alongside for years. Brilliant minds who had helped develop treatments that saved lives. Researchers who had sacrificed weekends and holidays to meet impossible deadlines. Women who had proven time and again that motherhood didn't diminish their intellectual capacity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Emily Watson, whose innovative protein synthesis research had revolutionized our anti-inflammatory drug development, looked like she was fighting back tears. Jennifer Park, the statistician whose data modeling had prevented 3 potentially catastrophic drug interactions from reaching market, sat frozen in her chair. These weren't underperforming employees being rightfully terminated. These were some of the most talented researchers in the pharmaceutical industry being systematically eliminated because they had committed the apparently unforgivable sin of becoming mothers. I understand, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I picked up my leather briefcase, checked that my laptop was securely fastened inside, and looked directly at Jessica. I'll have my personal belongings cleared out by the end of the day, quote. As I walked toward the door, I caught sight of Marcus Rodriguez, one of the younger researchers who had been hired just 6 months ago. He was nervously adjusting his tie, probably wondering if his decision to start a family with his wife might eventually land him in a similar meeting. The irony wasn't lost on me that the men in the room looked uncomfortable but not terrified. Their careers weren't hanging in the balance based on their parental status. I paused at the doorway and turned back to face the room. For what it's worth, I said, making sure my voice carried to every corner of that sterile boardroom, some of the most significant scientific breakthroughs in history have come from minds that learned to think differently, not despite their life experiences, but because of them. Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. We appreciate your understanding, Dr. Reeves. Best of luck in your future endeavors. I walked out of that conference room with my head held high, but my mind was already racing. The elevator ride down to the research floors felt like the longest 90 seconds of my professional life. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the familiar sounds of my world. The gentle hum of centrifuges, the soft beeping of automated analyzers, the quiet conversations of researchers discussing their latest findings. My lab was tucked away in the northeast corner of the building, a space I had carefully organized over 7 years to maximize both efficiency and creativity. The walls were covered with whiteboards displaying complex molecular structures, protein folding diagrams, and the kind of mathematical equations that most people would find incomprehensible. But to me, this chaos represented order. Every formula, every diagram, every hastily scribbled note was part of a larger puzzle I'd been working to solve. I began the methodical process of packing my personal belongings. My collection of specialized reference books, the family photos tucked behind my computer monitor, the coffee mug my daughter had decorated with uneven letters spelling, "World's Best Mom Scientist." Each item felt heavier than it should have, weighted with memories of late nights, breakthrough moments, and the countless hours I'd spent in this space, trying to make the world a little bit healthier. As I was disconnecting my external hard drives, my fingers brushed against a small USB device tucked behind my keyboard. I'd almost forgotten it was there. The plain black drive contained files I'd been working on during my own time. Research that had started as a side project but had evolved into something potentially revolutionary. 3 years ago, when my daughter Emma was still a baby, I'd become frustrated with the limitations of current drug delivery systems. Traditional oral medications had to survive the harsh environment of the stomach, navigate the complex absorption processes of the intestinal tract, and somehow maintain their therapeutic effectiveness by the time they reached their target tissues. Injectable drugs were more reliable but required medical supervision and often caused patient compliance issues. During those long nights when Emma was teething and sleep was impossible, I'd found myself sketching out theoretical solutions in a notebook beside her crib. What if there was a way to create a drug delivery system that was both patient-friendly and incredibly precise? What if we could develop microscopic capsules that could be programmed to release their contents at exactly the right time, in exactly the right location, with exactly the right dosage? The idea had started as an intellectual exercise, something to occupy my mind during those quiet 3 a.m. feeding sessions. But as Emma grew older and started sleeping through the night, I found myself spending my free time in the makeshift lab I'd set up in our garage. My husband David had initially been skeptical about my home experiments, but he'd gradually become my biggest supporter, bringing me coffee during late-night research sessions and taking Emma to the park on weekends so I could work uninterrupted. What I'd developed was a breakthrough in targeted drug delivery that could revolutionize how medications are administered. My system used biodegradable nanoparticles that could be programmed with specific release triggers. These microscopic capsules could be designed to respond to particular pH levels, temperature changes, or even specific enzyme concentrations found only in diseased tissues. The implications were staggering. Cancer medications could be delivered directly to tumor sites, minimizing the devastating side effects that patients currently endured. Antibiotics could be programmed to activate only when they encountered specific bacterial infections, reducing the risk of antibiotic resistance. Hormone therapies could be calibrated to release their contents based on the body's natural circadian rhythms. I'd been quietly documenting my research, filing provisional patents under my personal LLC, and building prototypes in my garage laboratory. The work was meticulous, methodical, and completely independent of anything I'd done at Meridian. I'd been careful to ensure there was no overlap between my employer's research and my personal projects, using different suppliers, different methodologies, and completely separate documentation systems. The irony was bitter and perfect. Jessica Whitmore had just fired me for having mommy brain, claiming that motherhood had somehow diminished my cognitive abilities. What she didn't know was that my experience as a mother had actually enhanced my problem-solving skills, forcing me to think more creatively, more efficiently, and more purposefully than ever before. When you're responsible for keeping a tiny human alive while simultaneously advancing scientific knowledge, you learn to optimize every moment. You learn to see connections that others miss. You learn to approach problems from angles that traditional thinking might overlook. The scattered thinking patterns Jessica had described weren't signs of cognitive decline. They were evidence of a mind that had learned to process multiple complex variables simultaneously. I slipped the USB drive into my briefcase and continued packing. The research files, the prototype specifications, the manufacturing processes, the safety testing protocols. Everything was safely stored on encrypted drives that would be coming home with me. Meridian Pharmaceuticals thought they were eliminating dead weight. Instead, they were about to lose access to technology that could transform their entire industry. As I was boxing up the last of my reference materials, Dr. Rebecca Foster appeared in my doorway. Her usually perfect composure was cracking, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Rebecca had been one of my closest colleagues for over 5 years, and her work on targeted drug delivery had always impressed me with its innovation and precision. "This is insane," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "They're gutting the most productive research division in the company. Do they have any idea what they're throwing away?" I looked up from the box I was sealing and met her eyes. "They think they're streamlining operations. What they're actually doing is eliminating institutional knowledge and innovative thinking. But that's their loss." Rebecca stepped into the lab and lowered her voice. "Catherine, some of us are talking about pushing back on this. Maybe filing a discrimination complaint or at least documenting what's happening here. This can't be legal." I considered her suggestion carefully. The temptation to fight back through official channels was strong, but I'd seen too many brilliant women get trapped in lengthy legal battles that drained their energy and resources while their careers stagnated. There had to be a better way. I appreciate the solidarity, I said, but I think my energy is better spent moving forward rather than looking backward. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated is proving everyone wrong. Rebecca nodded, though I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. Well, if you decide to start your own research company, you know where to find me. Half the talent in this building just got shown the door. After she left, I finished packing in relative solitude. The process felt strangely cathartic, like closing one chapter of my life so I could begin writing the next. I'd spent 7 years in this lab, contributing to research that had helped bring life-saving medications to market. I'd published papers that had been cited thousands of times, collaborated with researchers around the world, and mentored junior scientists who were now making their own contributions to the field. But I'd also spent 7 years working within someone else's vision, following someone else's research priorities, and watching my most innovative ideas get filtered through layers of corporate bureaucracy. For the first time in my professional life, I was going to have complete control over my research agenda. As I carried the last box out to my car, I passed the parking space that had been mine for 7 years. Tomorrow, someone else would park there, probably someone younger, someone without children. Someone who Jessica Whitmore believed could dedicate 100% of their focus to advancing Meridian's mission. What Jessica didn't understand was that my daughter hadn't divided my attention. She'd multiplied my motivation. Every late night in my home lab, every weekend spent perfecting my drug delivery system, every moment spent working toward a breakthrough. It was all driven by the desire to create a world where Emma would have access to better medical treatments if she ever needed them. I drove home that afternoon with a strange sense of anticipation rather than defeat. Emma would be getting off the school bus in an hour, and I wanted to be there to greet her with a snack and help her with homework. For the first time in months, I wouldn't be rushing back to the office for an evening meeting or worrying about leaving work unfinished on my desk. That evening, after Emma was asleep and David was grading papers at the kitchen table, I made my way out to the garage. My makeshift laboratory looked humble compared to the sophisticated facilities at Meridian, but it was mine. Every piece of equipment had been carefully selected and personally calibrated. Every experiment had been designed and executed according to my own vision. I pulled out the files documenting my drug delivery research and spread them across my workbench. 3 years of meticulous work, hundreds of hours of testing and refinement, and breakthrough technology that could change how medications are administered worldwide. Tomorrow, I would start making phone calls to patent attorneys and potential investors. I would begin the process of transforming my garage experiments into a legitimate pharmaceutical company. Jessica Whitmore thought she was eliminating a liability. Instead, she had just created her biggest competitor. The transformation began the moment I walked into my garage laboratory that Thursday morning, coffee in hand, and a determination I hadn't felt in years coursing through my veins. The fluorescent lights hummed to life, illuminating workbenches that suddenly felt less like a hobby space and more like the birthplace of something revolutionary. I had exactly $47,000 in savings, 3 years of documented research, and the kind of motivation that only comes from being systematically underestimated. My first call was to Patricia Caldwell, a patent attorney I'd met at a pharmaceutical conference 2 years earlier. Patricia specialized in biotechnology patents and had a reputation for being both brilliant and refreshingly direct. When I explained my situation, she didn't waste time with sympathy. "How solid is your documentation?" she asked, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Every experiment logged, every formula verified, every prototype tested and retested," I replied, spreading my research files across the garage workbench. "I've got safety data, efficacy studies, manufacturing protocols, and 3 provisional patents that I filed independently." "Good. Can you be in my office by 2 o'clock? And bring everything." Patricia's law firm occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Portland, the kind of building where serious money made serious decisions. Her office walls were lined with framed patents, each one representing millions of dollars in protected intellectual property. She reviewed my documentation with the focused intensity of a surgeon, occasionally making notes in the margins or cross-referencing technical specifications. After 90 minutes of meticulous examination, she leaned back in her leather chair and smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Dr. Reeves, what you've developed here isn't just innovative. It's paradigm shifting. Your targeted delivery system could make traditional drug administration methods obsolete. She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching out a strategy. We need to move fast on the full patent applications. The pharmaceutical industry is notorious for attempting to reverse engineer breakthrough technologies, and once word gets out about what you've created, every major company will be scrambling to develop their own version. Over the next 3 hours, we outlined a comprehensive intellectual property protection strategy. My 3 provisional patents would be converted into full utility patents, with additional applications covering the manufacturing processes, delivery mechanisms, and even the diagnostic tools required to optimize the system for individual patients. The beauty of your approach, Patricia explained, is that it's not just one invention, it's an entire ecosystem of interconnected technologies. Even if someone tries to work around one patent, they'll run into another. By the time I left her office that evening, I felt like I was carrying the blueprints for the future of medicine, but patents were only the beginning. I needed funding, manufacturing capabilities, regulatory approval, and a team of researchers who shared my vision. Most importantly, I needed to prove that my system actually worked in real-world applications. The next morning, I called Drive. Michael Chen, a former colleague who had left Meridian 18 months earlier to start his own biomedical consulting firm. Michael had always been frustrated with the pace of innovation at large pharmaceutical companies, and I suspected he might be interested in what I was building. Catherine, I heard about what happened, he said when he answered the phone. Jessica Whitmore is systematically destroying years of research progress. Half the talent at Meridian is either gone or looking for the exit. That's actually why I'm calling, I said. I want to show you something that might change your perspective on drug delivery entirely. We met at a small coffee shop near his office, where I walked him through my research using hand-drawn diagrams and carefully prepared prototypes. Michael was a brilliant biochemist with expertise in protein therapeutics, and I watched his expression change from polite interest to genuine excitement as he understood the implications of what I'd developed. This is extraordinary, he said, examining one of my nanoparticle samples under a portable microscope I'd brought along. The precision you've achieved in the release mechanisms is unlike anything I've seen in commercial development. How long have you been working on this? 3 years of dedicated research, but the theoretical foundation goes back even further, I replied. The inspiration actually came from watching my daughter's growth patterns and realizing that biological systems are incredibly sophisticated at delivering nutrients exactly where and when they're needed. Michael looked up from the microscope with an expression of amazement. You've essentially created artificial biological intelligence at the molecular level. These particles can make decisions about when and where to release their contents based on environmental conditions. Do you understand how revolutionary this is? Over the next 2 hours, we discussed the technical challenges involved in scaling my research from garage prototypes to commercial manufacturing. Michael's expertise in protein stability and biocompatibility would be invaluable for optimizing my delivery system for different types of medications. I want in, he said finally, not as a consultant but as a partner. What you've developed here could transform how we treat everything from cancer to autoimmune disorders. But you're going to need more than just technical expertise. You're going to need someone who understands regulatory pathways and clinical trial design. That someone turned out to be Dr. Amanda Foster, a former FDA regulatory specialist who had transitioned into private practice after becoming frustrated with the agency's resistance to innovative treatment approaches. Amanda had a reputation for helping biotechnology startups navigate the complex approval process for novel drug delivery systems. When Michael and I met with Amanda the following week, she immediately grasped the significance of what we were proposing. The FDA has been waiting for exactly this kind of breakthrough, she explained. Current drug delivery methods are inefficient, imprecise, and often cause unnecessary side effects. Your system addresses every major concern they've raised about existing technologies. Amanda outlined a regulatory strategy that would position my technology for expedited review under the FDA's Breakthrough Therapy designation. If we can demonstrate significant improvement over existing treatments in our initial trials, we could potentially reach market approval in 3 years, instead of the typical 7 to 10. Within 6 weeks of being fired from Meridian, I had assembled a core team of world-class experts, secured comprehensive patent protection, and developed a clear pathway to market approval. But I still needed funding to transform my garage laboratory into a legitimate pharmaceutical development company. Dr. Reeves, said Klaus Weber, Novartis's Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions, what you've developed represents a fundamental advancement in pharmaceutical science. We're prepared to offer $400 million for your company, plus additional milestone payments that could reach $1 billion as your technology reaches market. It was a life-changing amount of money, enough to secure financial independence for my family and provide substantial returns for our investors. But it also meant giving up control of technology that I believed could transform medicine for decades to come. I requested a week to consider their offer, during which time 2 other major pharmaceutical companies submitted competing bids. The attention was flattering, but it also confirmed something I had suspected. The established industry wanted to acquire my technology, not necessarily to develop it faster, but to control how it entered the market. The decision became clear during a conversation with Emma one evening as I was helping her with a science project about the human circulatory system. She was fascinated by how blood carries nutrients and oxygen to every cell in the body, and she asked me to explain what I did at work. I'm developing a way to deliver medicine more precisely, I told her, so that sick people can get better faster and feel less uncomfortable during treatment. Emma thought about this for a moment, then asked, "Will you be able to help a lot of people?" "I hope so, sweetheart, that's the goal." "Then you should do whatever helps the most people," she said with the uncomplicated wisdom that children often possess. The next morning, I called Klaus Weber and politely declined Novartis's acquisition offer. Instead, I proposed a strategic partnership that would allow his company to license our technology for specific therapeutic applications, while maintaining our independence and ability to work with multiple pharmaceutical partners. The negotiation process took 6 weeks, but we ultimately reached an agreement that provided us with substantial licensing revenue while preserving our ability to continue innovating. Similar partnerships followed with 2 other major pharmaceutical companies, each focused on different therapeutic areas where our delivery system could provide maximum benefit. 18 months after being fired for having mommy brain, our company had grown to 45 employees, secured partnerships with 3 of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, and begun Phase 1 clinical trials for our first commercially developed product, a targeted cancer therapy that delivered chemotherapy directly to tumor cells while leaving healthy tissue unaffected. The irony reached its peak when Meridian Pharmaceuticals approached us about licensing our technology for their oncology pipeline. Their research and development had stagnated following the mass departure of experienced researchers, and they were desperate for innovative solutions to revitalize their product portfolio. Jessica Whitmore herself led the delegation that visited our headquarters, her previous confidence replaced by carefully concealed desperation. She toured our laboratory facilities, reviewed our clinical trial data, and listened to presentations about our technology with the kind of forced attention that comes from recognizing a massive strategic mistake. "Dr. Reeves," she said during our final meeting, "we believe there could be significant synergies between Meridian's established market presence and your innovative delivery platform. We're prepared to discuss a substantial licensing agreement." I looked across the conference table at the woman who had fired me for supposedly having diminished cognitive abilities, and I felt no anger, no desire for revenge, only a quiet satisfaction that comes from proving doubters wrong through excellence rather than vindictiveness. "We appreciate Meridian's interest," I replied diplomatically, "but our partnership pipeline is currently at capacity. Perhaps we can revisit this conversation in a few years, after we've completed our current development commitments." It was a polite way of saying that we didn't need them, that the technology they had dismissed was now beyond their reach. Jessica's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her professional composure as she gathered her materials and prepared to leave. After the Meridian delegation departed, Rebecca Foster appeared in my office doorway with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "I think this moment deserves a toast," she said, popping the cork with theatrical flair. "To proving them wrong?" I asked, accepting a glass of champagne. "To proving ourselves right," she corrected. "There's a difference." As we watched the sun set over Portland's skyline from our conference room windows, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 18 months ago, I had been told that motherhood had compromised my ability to contribute to pharmaceutical innovation. Today, our company was leading the development of technology that would transform how medications are administered worldwide. The mommy brain that Jessica Whitmore had viewed as a liability had actually been my greatest asset. The experience of caring for a child while simultaneously advancing scientific knowledge had taught me to think more creatively, more efficiently, and more purposefully than ever before. The scattered thinking patterns she had criticized were actually evidence of a mind that could process multiple complex variables simultaneously. Emma was 7 years old now, and she had begun showing a genuine interest in science. She visited our laboratory occasionally, asking thoughtful questions about our research, and expressing amazement at how tiny particles could be programmed to deliver medicine exactly where it was needed. "Mommy," she said during one of these visits, "when I grow up, will I be able to do science like you?" "You can do anything you set your mind to," I replied, "as long as you remember that being underestimated is just an opportunity to exceed expectations." The clinical trial results exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Patients receiving our targeted chemotherapy experienced dramatically reduced side effects while achieving better treatment outcomes than those receiving traditional therapy. The FDA fast-tracked our approval process, recognizing the significant improvement our technology represented over existing treatment options. 3 years after being fired from Meridian, our first commercial product received FDA approval and began helping cancer patients around the world. Our company had grown to over 200 employees, established research partnerships with leading medical institutions, and begun developing applications for our technology in treating autoimmune disorders, genetic diseases, and chronic pain conditions. The transformation was complete, but it was also just the beginning. Every day brought new possibilities for applying our drug delivery system to different therapeutic challenges. Every successful treatment reminded us why we had chosen this difficult but rewarding path. I still worked long hours, still faced complex technical challenges, and still dealt with the demanding schedules that come with leading a rapidly growing biotechnology company. But now I did it all with the satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful, something that makes the world a little bit better for the next generation. Jessica Whitmore had fired me for having mommy brain, believing that motherhood had diminished my capacity for innovation. Instead, it had amplified my motivation to create technology that could help ensure no parent would ever have to watch their child suffer through ineffective or unnecessarily harsh medical treatments. The revolution in pharmaceutical delivery had begun in a garage laboratory, fueled by the determination of a mother who refused to accept that caring for her child made her less capable of changing the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.